at just 2 minutes past 1 o'clock, 56 years ago, a Welsh teenager, Brian Robson, was so homesick he decided to do the unthinkable and mail himself home in a crate, would you believe? Well, he's been good enough to speak to us about his adventures, and what an adventure it is too. And are you there, Brian?
Yes, I am, John. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. And more importantly for you, it's very early in the morning. We do appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. It's very, very good of you. And thank you so much for making the time to speak to us.
It's my pleasure. My pleasure.
Now, this is a wonderful story, as you well know. Can you tell me this plan that you had way back in 1965, was it hatched in a pub?
No, actually, that would be impossible, to be honest, John. Pubs in Melbourne closed at 6 o'clock.
Oh, that's right.
After.
Yeah, very true. Very, very true. Maybe I should.
Actually, if we were. Sorry. Go
ahead. I was going to say maybe I should have asked you. Then we'll change that. Was it hatched in a coffee shop?
No, actually, to be honest with you, if you walk down a street in Melbourne after 7 o'clock in the evening, it was like walking in the outback. There was nobody. It was absolutely.
Oh, really?
And everywhere.
Yes.
Everything was closed.
Oh. Brian, you were 19 years of age at that time. Just an amazing, amazing thing to do. Now, you did it mainly, I understand, because you were, as we said in the intro, you were very homesick, 11 months living down under, and I presume you came by yourself, you had no family at all.
That's right, John. And I must say, at this stage in time, had I have come with my family, I'd probably still be living in Australia now. But it was almost impossible to make friends as a single teen. Everything closed. It was, by the time you finished work, there was nothing to do. And meeting people was really difficult unless you were into sport, and I wasn't particularly into sport. So out of those 11 months, I spent a great deal of time on my own, quite honestly. And
yes,
and also the Victorian Railways, if I do say so, they weren't completely honest with what they told us to expect, and so of course that was a big disappointment. With teens, you make your mind up, you set your mind up. It's very difficult to break that mind pattern. And so all I could think of was going home. I couldn't think of anything else.
Sure, and obviously at the time, I believe that the price of a plane ticket was £700 at that time, which is quite a princely sum.
Well, the total price, because of course I would have had to pay the Australian government the fare out plus the fare back and so on. So
that's right.
It was between £700 and £800 in total. And I think, my salary was roughly £30 or £40 a month. And I had to live off that as well, of course.
Exactly. All right, Brian, look, maybe we might sort of backtrack a bit now. Could you tell us exactly how the plan came about? I understand you had two Irish friends who helped you. Could you tell us how the plan unfolded, as it were?
Yes, I was very fortunate. For the last couple of months I was there, I bumped into two Irish youths, in the railway hostel, and although I wasn't living there. And we used to see each other every night after work, so either I go to their hostel or they go to my bedsitter. And one, I think it was probably Sunday, we decided to go and look at an exhibition in Melbourne. And it was a UK type of exhibition, if I remember correctly, advertising UK companies and so on.
Yes.
And we went to the exhibition, and we came across a booth, and the booth said, Pickford's International Removers. We can send anything anywhere.
Good old Pickfords.
Good old Pickfords, yeah. And I joked to my friends. I said, well, perhaps they could move us, because my friends also wanted to go back. And, of course, we laughed about it. And then we went home. They went back to the hostel. I went back to my bedsitter. And I couldn't sleep all night. I just kept thinking of Pickfords, and I kept thinking of crates. And I came to the conclusion, if Pickfords could do it, so could I. And it doesn't make too much sense nowadays, but it made a great deal of sense to me in those days.
I'm sure.
And, yeah. And then, so the following day I went down to Qantas because I had no idea of how to freight anything or document anything. So I went down to Qantas's offices in Melbourne and made an inquiry, supposedly from a company, as to the maximum size I could shift or freight, the maximum weight. Would they send it COD, which to my delight they said yes, and what paperwork was required, because you needed a fair bit of paperwork in those days.
Oh, yes.
And none of us had ever seen this, But Qantas very kindly supplied me with all the information. And so I went back to see my friends in the hostel after getting that.
Now, I understand that one of your friends was 100% for it, but the other one thought it wasn't such a great idea.
Absolutely, John. If I actually describe that first conversation, I think when I got back to the hostel, I said to them, I'm going home. And they said, oh, brilliant, you've come into some money then. I said, no, no, I'm going to airmail myself. And one of them, Paul, actually said to me, well, look, if I nip out and buy the stamps now, we can catch the last post. And I said, I'm serious. I really am serious. And it took me 3 days to persuade them in general.
Yes. Now, I believe that the crate that you were in, the tiny box, it was about the size of what would hold a mini fridge. Is that right?
More or less, actually. I suppose it was big enough for me to sit down with my knees tucked into my chest, a few bits with me in my suitcase, but there was no room to move. Once I was in, I couldn't move at all. I couldn't twist and turn, or I couldn't turn over or anything like that. I had to sit in that position.
So what did you take with you, Brian?
Actually, I took my suitcase because it had my only possessions in the world at the time. I took a pillow, a hammer, a small torch, which was hanging up in front of me, and 2 bottles, one empty, for obvious reasons, and one with about a pint of water in. That was it.
Wow, gosh. You're amazing, Brian. Now, I believe the flight, the direct flight, should have taken about 36 hours, but there was a bit of a hiccup, I understand.
Yeah, actually, I think, to be honest, John, I think that time was more like about 48 hours. But I'm not 100% sure on that. Mm-hmm. But there was a hiccup. We made the crate. I got into the crate. We ordered a taxi truck to take it to the airport, and it took it to Melbourne Airport. When we got there, I waited about 2 hours, and they put me onto an aircraft. And, of course, in those days, they were all turboprops, apart from a few jets that were operating. And anyway, we flew to Sydney. And I was elated because I survived. It only took an hour and, 20 minutes or something.
Yes.
but I'd survived it, so I knew it was going to work in my mind anyway.
Yes.
And albeit I was cramped and aching and in pain,
yes,
but I'd actually arrived in Sydney. Once we got there, they turned the turned the crate upside down. I don't think deliberately. And so I was sort of sitting on my neck and head.
Oh, dear.
And I couldn't turn around,
Oh.
That was extremely painful, and I kept passing in and out of consciousness as the blood rushed around and so on. But that wasn't the most important part. The most important part was the flight had already taken off, the one I was supposed to be on, the one we booked the crate on.
Yes.
And I started worrying. And 22 hours later, or thereabouts, they put it onto another aircraft. And I thought, oh, that's okay. We're still on the same path. We're still, we're a little bit late on our journey, but we're still going the same way. Little did I know that wasn't true. They put it onto a Pan American aircraft instead of Qantas. And we stopped at every little landing strip between Sydney and the Pacific, and we flew right over the Pacific. And, of course, I knew nothing of this at the time.
No. It must have been terribly uncomfortable, but from what I understand, freezing cold and boiling hot for you as well.
Yes, I think it's very difficult to describe the actual time I spent in that crate, because once again I was going in and out of consciousness the whole time. I couldn't breathe some of the time, or I had a great deal of difficulty breathing. And as you say, the temperature went from absolutely freezing to absolutely boiling. There was no air pressure or stuff, or heating or stuff like that in the hold of the Boeing 707 in those days. And I didn't know where I was. And, of course, I was in complete darkness 99% of the time.
Oh, dear.
And I just lost track of time. I lost track. I had nightmares. Oh, quite serious nightmares. At least I assume that's what they were.
I'm sure you must have done.
Oh, it was terrible. I wouldn't do it again. I can assure you.
Now, tell us what happened when you got to Los Angeles.
Well, we arrived at what I thought was London. And they'd offloaded the crate off the aircraft, so I assumed I'd finally made it. But by then I was too ill and too unwell and too stiff, and my joints wouldn't work, my muscles wouldn't work or anything properly.
Yes.
And so I waited in this freight transit shed, because the plan was I'd wait until it got dark, and then I would use the hammer, knock the side of the crate out, and just walk home, you see.
Yes.
As everybody does when they stow away on an aircraft. So it was a very well thought out plan. But anyway, so I was sitting there, and I wanted to find out what time it was, basically to find out whether it was daytime or nighttime or whatever.
Yes.
And I managed to get my hand across to this torch, which took ages, actually. I picked the torch up. At the same time as I picked it up, I must have turned it on and then dropped it because of lack of muscle coordination and so on. And so the torch hit the floor, and the beam was shining out through one of the slits in the crate. Well, maybe half an hour later, 2 airport workers were walking past, and I heard one of them say, in an American accent, which really depressed me, there's a light coming out of that crate. And they walked over, they looked at the paperwork, examined it in detail, and then he said, it's computer parts for repair. And then there was a little notch hole on the side of the crate. One of them bent his knees and sort of put his eye right up against the notch and looked in, and he could see me. If there was an Olympic Games that year, he really would have won a gold medal, because I have never seen a backward flip quite so quick or so fast.
Yes, you must have frightened the life out of him, that's for sure.
It did indeed. He was screaming at the top of his voice, there's a body in there, there's a body in there. And I couldn't tell him there wasn't, because I couldn't speak or anything. I couldn't do anything.
Yes.
Anyway, they both disappeared for maybe half an hour. Came back with dozens of people. It's difficult to remember how many.
Yes.
And then the senior chap there got on his knees. I found out why it took so long to come back, by the way. They were trying to persuade their supervisor about this body, and the supervisor thought they were joking, you see. And anyway, they sort of, the supervisor, or the senior, actually was an FBI chap, I think, bent down in the same position as the handler originally, and looked through the little notch hole, and our eyes met. And he stood up and he said, "There's not a body in there. He's alive." But I still couldn't speak or anything.
Oh dear. So I presume you were taken away for interrogation by the FBI then?
No, not at that stage. I was taken away, but on a stretcher to the nearest hospital, which was Los Angeles Central Receiving Hospital.
Yes.
Because to interrogate me in those days, at that time, would have been impossible. I mean, I just couldn't even speak. I couldn't eat. I couldn't do anything.
No.
Couldn't drink. So they took me to the Los Angeles Central Receiving Hospital. And I got to say at this stage, the Americans were absolutely marvelous. That's not just the authorities, but the general population were coming in to see me after I started to recover. And the Americans were brilliant. They really were,
Well, I suppose you were a bit of a celebrity,
Oh, so I've been hounded by press and television. I actually, one of my claims to fame, I made one of the first appearances on an old thing called Telstar, which was a satellite, and they linked the Los Angeles hospital up with the BBC, and we'd done a broadcast. And I watched my parents here in Cardiff, in America, and they looked, seen me, and that was amazing. I mean, I couldn't get over that. The technology of the day,
Definitely.
And even aircraft had indoor toilets, although I didn't realise it at the time.
Oh, dear. Now, you're going to tell me about the interrogation by the FBI. Was that fairly friendly, or did they treat you with a great deal of suspicion or something like that? How did that go?
Well, there was a little bit of suspicion there, but most reports, newspaper reports and stuff, as with most newspapers, are invented by the author.
Yes.
And in actual fact, there was no hostility, really. They said to me, I think the next day, and also I wasn't put in a prison ward, which has been broadcast throughout the world over the years.
Okay.
I was in a private room where the window was open, so if it was a prison ward, it wasn't stopping me getting out if I wanted to.
No.
But no, they said to me, look, Brian, we've got to interview you. Now, were you, well, I think first of all, there's a possibility that I was a spy, a Cold War spy.
Sure, yes.
And I said, no. And they said, were you kidnapped? Did somebody kidnap you and put you in there? And I said, no, I wanted to go home.
Yes.
And it took me a while to get that out because of my throat and everything else.
Yes.
And they looked at each other. There were, I think, 2 or 3 of them there, I can't remember. And I think more or less smiled.
Yes.
And the smiles didn't stop from then on. I mean, it was just... they even used to come and see me in the hospital just for a general chat and make sure I was okay and everything else. And that was the FBI.
Yes.
And then they allowed people in, normal Americans in, to visit me, and mainly immigrants who had gone to America instead of Australia. And they were coming in and wishing me the best. And, I made more friends in the 6 days I was in that hospital, I think, than in the whole time I was in Australia.
Yes. What happened then? Did they send you back to Australia? Is that what happened, or did they send you home to Wales after that?
No. Actually, what happened was after about 6 days, the 2 FBI officers came into the hospital ward, and they said, Brian, we're going to take you to see the director of the FBI in Los Angeles.
Yes.
So they took me in a car to his office. There was, God knows how many people over there.
Yes.
Reporters and so on.
Yes.
He locked them all out, so there was just him and I in the room. And he said, Brian, as much as we'd love to have you here, and we would, believe me, you don't have a passport, and we can't keep you here because technically you've illegally entered the United States. Yes. So we've got to send you back. But it's actually Pan American's duty or job to do that because they brought you in.
Yes.
And actually, that was the first time I realized it was Pan American and not Qantas that taken me in.
Yes.
Thank goodness for Pan American. Qantas would have taken me back to Australia.
Yes. Yes.
But anyway, he said, I've got to phone them now and find out what they're going to do. But I wouldn't worry too much. I think things are going to be okay. Then he phoned up Pan American and he put the phone down and he said, okay, I got some good news for you. You're actually to London and you're going this afternoon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then he wanted me to help him. He asked me if I would, and I said, yes, of course. And he called the press in and he pretended to make the phone call the second time.
Oh, I see. Yes, of course. Yes.
Yeah. And then he said, Brian, you're going back to London.
Oh, wow.
And, of course, they were all snapping away and videoing. Well, they weren't videoing, they were filming.
Yes, yes.
And then he and 1 or 2 others took me to the airport with a tour of Los Angeles on the way. Got to Los Angeles airport, and I was taken into a private room. when I was told I had a first-class seat reserved for me.
Oh, didn't you do well?
Oh, I did. I was shown on the aircraft. And the strange thing in those days, though, it was different to now. Flying was an exclusive thing.
Sure, yes, yes.
Yeah. And I took the seat and we took off and everything else. And they made an announcement that they would like to welcome on board the stowaway from, I think they said Sydney, but the stowaway from Sydney.
Yes.
And everybody clapped. And I was totally embarrassed by that.
Well, as a 19-year-old, you would have been. I mean, goodness. Yes.
I had to ask the chap, there was an old chap sitting next to me.
Yes.
On the aircraft. And he said to me, they kept coming up for my autograph. and I must have been showing embarrassment.
Yes.
And he said, look, if you don't want to give them your autograph or you're shy or something, take my word for it. Just pretend you're asleep. Close your eyes when they come up and they won't bother you.
Yes.
And I took his advice and, I got away with that.
Oh, that's good. Now, tell me, what sort of a reception did you get from family when you eventually got home?
Sorry, got from who?
No, I was going to say, what sort of a reception did you get from your family when you got home?
A lot worse than I got from the FBI.
I'm sure, yes.
Actually, they were extremely pleased to see me. They weren't shocked. They knew I was in, and that's another story on its own, but they knew I was in America.
Yes.
So they weren't shocked, but they were pretty annoyed at the way I did it.
Yes.
But that soon wore off, to be honest. I mean,
I'm sure.
It was a sort of a very quick telling off, to say the least.
Yes, they'd have been more than pleased to have you home, I'm sure.
They were, actually, they were.
Yes.
And being home wasn't full of joy, to be honest, because it was when I was indoors, but I couldn't go outside for the press.
Yes, yes, exactly.
And so my father used to open the door, and in those days, we didn't have a telephone, so they had to come to the door.
Yes.
The front door. And my father used to go there and just, I'm sorry, he's not giving any interviews, and then close the door.
Oh,
and I had to stay in, bored out of my mind, wanting to go and meet the rest of my family and friends.
Now, Brian, you've written a book about this, about your escapades. Would you like to tell us about that? It's called The Crate Escape. Would you like to tell us all about it, please?
Sure. It actually started off, to be honest, as a film contract, because the BBC 6 years ago, just over 6 years ago, it was the 50th anniversary. And the BBC dragged it up, contacted me, and begged me almost to appear on the One Show, which is a big chat show here in the UK. And I said, yes, why not? So I did it, because of course it comes up periodically anyway. So I appeared on the One Show, and after that I had many, many emails. And one of the emails was from the film company, movie company. And they wondered whether I'd like to make a movie of it, or be involved in making a movie of it. And I said, well, yes. I mean, who says no to a movie?
Oh, exactly. Yes, yes.
So we negotiated and everything else, and I signed the contract, which is going ahead at the moment, actually. And then...
just on that, Brian, just on that question there, have you got anybody in mind to play the young Brian here?
Well, actually, John, the first thoughts were myself, obviously.
Yes, yes.
Superstar. But they turned that idea down.
Yes.
And there are two people, actually, I understand anyway, two people being considered. But I'm not free to tell you who.
No, of course, yes.
But there are two well-known stars who, and I can tell you a little bit on the two stars. One doesn't have a Welsh accent, or at least cannot do a Welsh accent, so we'll need a voice coach.
Yes, exactly, yes.
Whereas the other one does actually, or can do, a very nice Welsh accent.
Yes.
So... I even volunteered to be the voice coach, but I was turned down for that.
Well, you'd have been very good, I'm sure, Brian. Very, very good.
Well, I don't know. But anyway, because of that, and bits of email and stuff and whatever, everybody was saying, why don't you write a book? Why don't you write a book? And I said, I don't think so. But about 3 years ago, I did. And it was taken up by Austin Macaulay Publishers, I'm pleased to say. and is just reaching the bookshelves over here and online with Amazon and the other booksellers,
Yes.
Which I'm rather pleased about. It's also, according to the publisher, it's gone ballistic. It's
I'm sure it has.
selling. Yeah, I'm rather pleased about that somebody would want to read about it.
Yes.
Because it seems so old to me. I've lived with it for 56 years.
Yes. Can I ask you, Brian, why did you take so long to write it?
I didn't want to write it, to be honest, John. It wasn't. I haven't. I've been living this thing for 56 years.
Sure.
But living it secretly. If you understand what I mean?
Yes.
It's only when television stations, in particular over here, brought it up that I thought, oh yes, okay, I'll do it or whatever, half-heartedly, and I went ahead and done it. And I didn't really want to write a book. I didn't want to tell people exactly, what happened. And I did it rather like forced labor in some ways.
Yes. Well, I imagine it would have been quite therapeutic for you to sort of put it all down on paper, as it were.
It certainly brought back more memories than I would care to wish to be brought back in some ways. It took me 18 months to write it.
Yes.
And I wasted 18 months. I really didn't expect the publisher to publish it.
Yes.
Because it's so normal to me. I mean, everybody says, what a wonderful story, but it's not that wonderful to me. I actually, yesterday, I went shopping. I had to buy a new dining table and chairs.
Yes.
And we went to a big furniture store because they've only just reopened.
Yes.
And we went there, and we were looking at various items, and I got mobbed. There were two ladies came up to me and said, "You're that from the crate, aren't you?" And I said, "Oh yeah." and then within 2 minutes, we were surrounded by I don't know, maybe 10 or 20 people, all wanting to take photographs.
Oh, amazing!
And whereas it sounds funny, it's not what I want. I want to get back to my own private life now.
Yes, yes. And how's your family taking it now with all this newfound fame?
Well, they've been updated over the years, basically, because one cannot do things without warning people in advance, perhaps. Sure. And even the youngest, who won't be listening because he's in the UK and he's probably asleep, now. Yes. Ryan, he's 8 years old, and even he knows about it. Oh, and rather a funny story there appeared on the internet last week, I think, when Ryan's mother actually took a photograph of him in a toy box with his head poking out. Oh, dear. And he wanted to be like Brian.
Oh, isn't that sweet? Oh, that's lovely. Oh, that's really, really
He better
nice.
not be. I'll kill him if he does.
Look, Brian, it's been lovely chatting to you. Thank you so much for getting up at this ungodly hour over in the UK. I do appreciate you've been most generous with your time. Thank you so much. I hope the book sales go through the roof, and also the film, when it eventually gets done, is a big success as well. Thank you ever so much for all that you've done for us today on the lunch break on 2BACR FM 100.9.
Really my pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me, and my love to all your listeners.
I suppose I should let you go back to bed now, and
that's a lovely idea.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Brian. All the best.
My pleasure. You take care.
Bye-bye now.